Hello and welcome to Hunt Down the Threequel, where we take a look at cancelled Half-Life 2 sequels. Today, for our final episode, we're going to be taking a look at Half-Life 3 version 2, also known as HL3-v2. So, unfortunately, this is the one that we probably know the least information about. However, there is still enough to get a good conversation going. So, we're just going to start off straight away with talking about the gameplay, because it's what we probably know the most about, and unfortunately it's still very little. The game would have featured the player once again in the shoes of Gordon Freeman, although this time with a mechanical arm that would allow him to manipulate the environment, the elements, and most importantly the temperature. It's unknown how exactly this would have been implemented, however, it seems that the game would have been leaning into a more non-linear style of gameplay. Rather than being a completely linear crafted experience, the game would have featured a lot of roguelike elements that would keep the game fresh on each replay. For example, the game would be placed into a situation where a hostage was placed inside a building, and they would have to find a way inside, and enemies and the environment and everything around them would have been randomized. These would have been mixed in with the more scripted linear sequences that the games have been known for. As for the story, it would have taken place 20 years after the events of Half-Life 2 Episode 2. Gordon Freeman would have woken up in an Aperture test laboratory, Aperture being the company within the Portal series of games who created the Borealis ship. He would have woken up with his new mechanical arm and gone outside to realise that the Resistance is almost completely destroyed. The Combine is still ruling over Earth, and there are very few people still left fighting. Gordon would have to take on the Combine with this small group of people. So what happened to the development of this game? We know very little of the development. However, we know that it was actively being worked on in 2016 as a piece of leaked concept art called Post-Human, which depicted Gordon with his robotic arm, is dated to be from 2016. However, it is very likely that it was worked on before, and it was worked on before that. The game ended up being scrapped so that more work could be put towards Half-Life Alyx, which had finally entered development. Half-Life Alyx would end up being the first Half-Life game released since 2007's Half-Life 2 Episode 2. So Valve obviously decided to scrap the game to work on a spin-off, to work on a VR prequel spin-off, but why? It's possible that Valve felt that there was too much pressure on Half-Life 2. That's one of the reasons why they cancelled Half-Life 3 version 1. Not just that the gameplay was stagnant, but that there was such immense pressure on to end the story in a great way. So Valve had perhaps just looked at what they had and decided that it wasn't worth putting out a game that could potentially polarize all their fans, and decided to put out a prequel that would still be tangible to the story, but that not everyone had to play and not everyone had to enjoy. The visual style and the story of this game was obviously going to be a lot more bleak. That post-human concept art that I talked about earlier is visually striking and can be quite disturbing to look at. However, I don't think this game would have been much of a success, as it feels like a radical departure from the Half-Life games that we know of, and to be perfectly honest, I'm kind of glad that it was scrapped in favour of Half-Life Alyx. However, I wouldn't mind getting a glimpse into a reality where this game did release, as it does sound like a pretty interesting premise, and I hope that Valve picks it up, but under a different IP later on, like they plan to do with the Portal 2 f-stop beta. Anyway, that is all. I want to thank you all for listening to this podcast series, and just if you enjoyed it, I'd like to thank you for enjoying it. This is just a little thing that I made, and I'm very glad that you all took the time to listen to it. Thank you.